Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Hannon. It's my pleasure this evening to have a conversation with John Manthei. So we'll get to that in a moment. As I always begin, if you have phones and haven't put them in airplane mode or silenced them, that would be awesome if you did that. And among the many events that Michelle has organized for the summer, a couple I want to point out for this week. Tomorrow night in this venue, Heart Attacks and Aging, Know the Signs and Protect Your Life. I'm not talking to my peers here, I'm just saying. Shri Harsha Gauthwan will talk about that. On Discover Alaska on Wednesday, it's a changing landscape, community development in Alaska. That's Dr. Charlene Stern, who's Vice Chancellor for Rural Community and Alaska Native Education. And then down at the Borgeson Botanical Garden on Thursday at 6 o'clock, Ryan Bowers and the Brain Trust and one of my favorite groups, Almost Dominion. That's at 7:30. So, lots to look forward to this week. We acknowledge the Alaska Native nations upon whose ancestral lands our campuses reside. The Trothyada campus is located on the ancestral lands of the Dene people of the lower Tanana River. And one other event I forgot to mention, it was a last-minute insertion that Michelle organized on August 11th. It won't be here, we're thinking Scheibel Auditorium. We'll have two fine authors, Dan O'Neill and Dermot Cole, in conversation. So that's something to look forward to. Again, it's 7 o'clock, and that's on August 11th. Let's introduce John. His preferred habitat, no mystery here, is the woods or on the water, while his preferred activity is making things, and he's been doing that for over 70 years. He says in college he dabbled for a while in botany, but that couldn't even keep him out of the woods. His need to make things led him eventually to a career in cabinet and furniture making and construction. He also became a dog musher, lived in the bush, and built dog sleds. Along the way, John enjoyed helping others, making things, so teaching became just another passion. John was one of the founding members of the Folk School of Fairbanks, which offers a variety of programs and classes. He loves to share his knowledge of making things from materials that he has harvested from the woods and showing others how to join in the fun. Please welcome John Manthei.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure to have you here. Let's go back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. What was it like growing up there?
Well, it was actually quite a wonderful childhood. I had a great family, and I was born in downtown Milwaukee, and then my parents and myself and my two sisters were part of White Flight, which is a bit of a thing to think about these days, but we moved to the suburbs, and at that point there was rural country just beyond where we lived, and so bicycling out to little creeks and mud holes and stuff was quite easy, and so it was a good way to grow up.
Yeah, I can see where you got your love of the woods maybe, but did your family go camping? Was that a big part of growing up for your family?
My family didn't camp, but my father was quite an ardent fisher, and so we would go fishing at every possible opportunity, and that meant going up north and renting a little cabin on some lake and renting a boat and fishing, and that was what it all involved. I only later went camping with my parents. They never did that.
Yeah, how interesting. But talking about your dad, he was a commercial artist, so I'm guessing it was a creative household?
It was music. Both my parents were very involved in music. They both played piano and sang in choirs, and my dad actually had a band during the big band era, and he played banjo and clarinet and guitar and I don't know, and
Yeah.
piano, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and your sister became an educator and artist too. Is that right?
That's right. She was an art educator and an artist in her own right.
Yeah. Did you ever want to become a painter or go into the fine arts? Maybe for a second.
Well, no, well, I mean, I was a lousy student, and art was one of the things that I could actually excel at. And so it might have been my only A ever. And yeah, so no, I never thought of it as a pathway, but I sure enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, well, let's go on and about making things. While you didn't see it as a pathway, the fine arts, you were always making things, you told me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I started when I was a little kid, and my parents have told me that I had my first major cut with a pocket knife at 6 or 7. So I think that kind of tells it all. So yeah, I started making things at a very young age, and I don't know as I ever bought a gift for anyone. I always made things for everyone, and I still do that today. So.
Do you remember an early creation of yours? Do you remember anything that you made back then?
Oh well, when I visit my two sisters, there are things there that I created a long time ago, and yeah, they're quite something. Birds, I carved a lot of birds for a while. I made bird houses at a very young age. I actually made a bird cage one time, and those things still are around as sort of a reminder of how it all started, but not necessarily to be proud of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think even Mozart probably as a kid had a wrong composition occasionally. Maybe
not.
yeah. Okay. Well, you say that in college you dabbled in botany and had a focus there. Tell me about, Andy, since you became a teacher eventually, what were there models for you on how to teach and engage minds?
Ooh.
Did you have a professor that spoke to you? Or, I mean, why botany? You went into botany for a while.
Oh, now we're getting to the heart of the matter. I went into college because the Vietnam War was threatening my existence. And so in order to avoid the draft, young men of my age went to college. And as long as you could keep your grades up, you stayed away from the draft. And they were drafting anyone at the time. And I was a terrible student, and I was sort of flunking out, and I got into a motorcycle accident, and then that gave me a deferment, temporary deferment from the Army, because I immediately got drafted on crutches. And then I went back to school and went to the guidance counselor, and they did all these tests on me and decided that, well, you should have been a farmer. And so...
Oh, for me, it was a lighthouse keeper.
There you go. This is perfect. Yeah. So botany was kind of in the farming realm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
But you never stopped creating things. And I always kind of, for someone who has that through line in their life, that idea of putting hands on, that must have been a stability for you, no matter what you were doing, because you were still creating, right? And going out into the woods at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always had to be making something, whatever that was.
Okay. Well, I want to get you to Alaska. What drew you north?
Well, like I said, with my father, you always go fishing. The best fishing is up north. If you're from the Midwest, this is a very familiar term because everything up north is better than where you are. And if you happen to live in Grand Marais, which is northern Minnesota, then up north is Canada. And I already had been to the boundary waters in the Quetico in Canada and ventured even further north than that, but up north. And then oil was discovered, and I thought, wow, that's up north, and that's a state, and I don't have to buy an out-of-state fishing license. So that was as much thought as went into it.
Well, it got you here anyway.
It did indeed. Yeah.
Well, and you also credit a strong community of individuals who were here to kind of orient you and welcome you and engage. Tell me about what Alaska was like in those days, John, and who some of these folks were.
Well, I came up in winter. I graduated middle of the year, so I left in January or something, and I came up here, and it was kind of cold, and I didn't know my way around, and I had a little shell on the back of my truck, and I flub-dubbed around and finally found a little pullout off the Chena Pump Road, and after a little while I was applying for jobs because I was pretty broke at the time, and I think the first person that I actually met was Joe Nava, because he was the executive director of Arctic Biology at the time, and he had a temporary job possibility for me, and it was actually substitute for John Bessie, who was the stockroom clerk at Arctic Biology, and Joe asked if I'd want to fill in for John for a month or two. And then Joe said, and by the way, how are you doing? Are you able to buy groceries? And I said, well, it's getting kind of tight. And he gave me $20, and he says, well, after you're done with this job, you pay me back. And so that was the nature of people ever since. And so the university, well, and then I'm still living in my camper off Chena Pump Road, and I met a fellow there building a cabin out of railroad ties, and I helped him for a while because I had to be making something, and he introduced me to the Koponen family. And of course the Koponen sauna, and that became my weekly bath. And then the Koponens took me to meeting, which was the Herod family, and I met the Herod family. And then I got a job via John Bryant, who many of you know was a scientist at Arctic Biology, well, kind of in and out at the time, and he was leaving his position, and I got a job to work for Keith Van Cleve on a revegetation study for the pipeline. And his lab had no other than Liz Berry working there, and through Liz I met Ginny and Celia, and then Joan Foote was also working there, so I met Joan and Bruce, and so now I had, and Les Viereck was working there, I got to know him, John Sasada, and I don't know these people, they're just people, and then I'm slowly beginning to hear their stories, and I'm thinking, this is really miraculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the giants, some of the giants for our community.
Absolutely.
And that's the wonderful thing about Alaska, I think. You know, you can come up here and everybody is just who they are. And
Exactly.
yeah, there's no pretense, and most folks were welcoming. Somebody offered me a car one of the first week I was here. And so they weren't so smart. But anyway. Okay, so working for Arctic Biology, did your botany education come in college at all working there?
Ostensibly, yes. But bless his heart, Keith Van Cleve hired me an assistant who was actually a botanist from Norway, a fellow by the name of Harold Pine, and he saved my bacon because he really knew what he was doing, and the two of us had great adventures. Yeah, both doing science and just adventures.
Yeah. I want to take a moment and just acknowledge that we lost Mary Shields recently, and I know she was part of your life and introduced you to a number of people back then. So my condolences, and any reflections on that period and
Well, it was certainly a pivotal time of my life. I did a lot of growing up in that time, and I learned a lot about the wilderness and living out and dogs. And I mean, she introduced me to dogs. She was running Roger Berggraff's dogs at the time, and she dragged me along and said, "You got to try this out." And that was kind of exciting. And yeah, and she introduced me to a lot of people that have become lifelong friends, like Dick and Mary and the Mayo family, and just about lots of other people. And yeah, and we spent time in the woods. We built a place out in the woods, and that experience was new to me. And yeah, it was a lot of growing happened then.
Yeah.
And we had many incredible adventures traveling around by dogs and
Yeah.
stuff. So,
Well, do you remember your first dog ride, driving them? Does that a vivid memory of the first time you were?
well, I acquired 3 mangy dogs and decided that, yeah, I'm into this. So I decided to go. I had a friend that flew me to Wiseman, and I went up through what has become the gates of the Arctic and up onto the slope and then around down through Anatovik and stuff with 3 dogs. And of course, it was a huge snow year. And so I snowshoed back and forth, back and forth, back and forth the whole time. And I didn't know what I was doing. That was my introduction.
Wow.
Yeah.
Quite an intro. Well, you're here.
I am here, yes. Yeah,
So we're lucky about that. Well, eventually you even build sleds.
yeah.
So tell me about that. Did you see a sled and you think, no, I can improve on that, or I know how to do that?
Well, Liz and Bill Berry loaned me a sled that they had from when they were up in Barrow, and it needed repair, so I repaired that and used that for a while. And then I thought, well, I can do this, so I built a sled, and then I built lots of sleds. I mean, I copied sleds, so I had been given sleds from the Park Service, and I tried them, and they didn't work very well, and I had been given sleds from the village, and they worked a little better, but they were more racy sleds. And so I learned by repairing sleds for people, and then developed a design of my own.
What did you discover? I mean, John, that's like a trial and error. Did you find that there was a design you hit upon that was a sweet spot for you when you started making your own sleds?
Well, you'll never find 2 dog mushers that agree on this. Sorry, that just doesn't exist.
Okay, sweet spot for
For
you.
me, yes.
Yeah.
I found one that I liked quite nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them around still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you eventually branch out and start working in cabinetry and making furniture and construction. Tell me how that evolved in your experience.
Well, I built a little shop on Gina Ridge, and that's where I started building sleds. And then I actually built some furniture there. And then Mary Shields introduced me to Bill Lynch, who wanted to build a workshop. And he and I partnered up, and we built a shop, and we worked together for a while building things. And he was also working for a contractor at the time. And so I worked both for the contractor, and Bill and I worked together making furniture as a start. And then Bill went back into flying full time, and I was left with the shop all by myself, which was nice because then I started building more and more and kind of outgrew that, and then built a bigger shop and a bigger shop and a bigger shop.
Yeah, it's sort of like evolution, isn't it? You know, a form
Totally
follows
is.
function. And,
Yeah.
And well, okay, so I'm going to break that out in a couple of pieces, though, because there's construction of houses, shops, whatever, and then there's cabinetry and more furniture. Do you see a difference or distinction there in approaching it as a craftsperson or artist? Or are they both just building things, making things?
Well, they are both building things, but I think for many of us, there really isn't a big distinction. I mean, you get the same satisfaction and you can put the same amount of creative energy into building a deck as you can building a chair. And they're very different disciplines, but no, I think the creative piece of that is really wonderful. The nice thing about construction is you're outside and it's heavy work and it's fun to see big things take form. And that's really fun and rewarding, and that's a treasure. But when you're in a shop and you're building little things and you're doing lots of sanding and fussing and stuff, it takes a different sort of discipline.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Well, let's stick with that then for a minute. You know, the idea of the Platonic chair or the Platonic, bed or something like that. Did you monkey around a little bit with form and find designs that you thought were more pleasing or functional?
Yeah, that was a major part of what gave me excitement, was designing things and fiddling around. And I had been seeking out help in Fairbanks from people that might be able to coach me and stuff, and I'd pretty much run everybody dry. And so when I turned 40, I went out to New York and actually studied with quite a famous cabinet maker or furniture maker out there, and he sort of opened my eyes to a whole new way of thinking about things and stretched my limits quite a lot.
Were the materials you encountered back east available to you when you got here, or did you come to appreciate local materials as good for what you wanted to achieve?
At the time, I didn't really distinguish much between local and imported materials, and imported materials were readily available through a fellow friend that had started a wood business, and I could get my hands on just about anything I wanted. So materials weren't a problem. It was basically just stretching your idea of what form and function was all about. I mean, this guy was an artist, and he didn't like the word craftsman.
Oh, really?
Craft, yeah. He had a most obnoxious sign in his school. It said, "We don't do craft." And that still sticks in my craw. That was really disgusting.
I don't do windows and I don't do craft.
Right, exactly.
Well, but I'm going to follow a little bit more. When you start selling and engaging and making things for others, there's a component, a social and economic component that's introduced there, isn't there?
Totally.
Yeah.
So I had two different venues. I had one where I would make things to sell outright in a gallery. And at the time, it was Gloria Fish's artwork, which of course was another gateway to amazing people. And I would make bowls and boxes and small furniture items, and she would sell them there. And that was social in that she would have openings, and just dealing with her and her cadre was very social. But then in the shop doing my normal job, which was making things for people specifically, I was designing for them and producing things. And so that was a very social piece of it.
Right. And then, of course, eventually, when you go into cabinetry as a main effort, I suppose that just ratchets up. I mean, you've got customers who have an idea, and you have an idea, and making sure they overlap is an important piece of that, I would think.
Yeah, I often felt that designing kitchens for people was more about marriage counseling than it was designing the kitchen. finding a couple that could agree, and then both of them agreeing with me was, yeah.
I have a friend who, he and his wife built their house together, and he said the strongest test of our marriage was building that house.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. Well, let's go to houses and construction then on that side of things, because of course Fairbanksans have always been creative, I would say, in their structures, and there are some really interesting designs you can see out there. But when you're building for people, would they bring designs to you and you say, well, think about this, you could do this, or how did that work when you build a project as big as a house?
I never did any, well, I take that back. I built some small houses, little log structures, and those are pretty simple. They're just rectangular boxes of stacked up logs, and so I never really did fancy houses until much later, and then fortunately I never did them by myself. I had co-workers to guide me and learn from and work together with, and usually the design was presented to us and we manipulated that within parameters. I never designed, okay, I designed our own house, but, and yeah.
Yeah, and well, you talked about designing shops. I'm sure you have to, there's some thought that goes into that. And so, but when you talk about having a crew involved, and when you're making cabinetry, you have employees helping you in that. That seems like an evolution in terms of just the commercial side of things. How did that fit for you, John? Was that a comfortable development?
No.
No.
I mean, I love having people around and working with them, but the responsibility of having employees and then having to know that you could provide a living for them. So when was the next job going to come up? Did you have another job? And an employee's not working very fast and you're kind of losing money, and are you going to be able, all that business stuff really bogged me down. I didn't like that at all.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine so. And I suppose you have to have skilled people coming into the shop, and you want to make sure they're using safe practices. So you had to really kind of oversee, at least initially, till you had a floor foreman or a floor person to handle that thing, right?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, I was basically training people as they came on board, and then one fellow stayed with me forever, and he became, well, he surpassed me, which was really wonderful. And but yeah, he started with little experience and was adept. And all our employees after that, including my two stepdaughters, all got trained by me, and it was great, a lot of fun.
You know, just kind of an aside observation, that kind of familial relationship to the workplace and to the hands-on is so ancient in our culture. I mean, it used to be people worked at home and their shop was at home, the blacksmith or the cobbler or the tailor or something like that. And so the family saw the person working and would engage in that way. Was that a satisfying aspect for you? Because it seems like it has a deep cultural resonance.
Well, sure, but I mean, this was in another structure, so it wasn't in the family setting other than my two stepdaughters, which,
right.
Well, and all her friends. I mean, I eventually hired a mess of them at various times, and they were just great, and it was so much fun doing that.
I'm going to talk, I raised this as sort of like to prefigure talking about the folk school. because in that sense, that idea of hands-on experience and building again a thread that goes deep into our past. No matter where you live on the globe, there were people making things and learning those skills. And so at a certain size, I mean, you never go into a vast industry with machines clanking out, stamping out metal pieces for further construction down the line. It's always a pretty manageable sized operation for you, isn't it, John?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And so when you go to learn or develop or start the folk school, what were your models for that then, John? What were the sort of ideas floating around that you said, well, this is an important skill that people ought to share or learn or experience?
I don't think that's quite the way it all started.
Tell me how it started.
Well, so I helped a couple come over from Germany and get a green card, and she was a trained woodcarver, professional woodcarver from Germany, and she had a very formidable folk school experience in Germany. And
Marianne Stoltz?
yes.
Yeah.
And she introduced me to the idea of folk school. She also wanted to teach. And so as a piece of this green card fanarking around we did, she had to become my employee. I certainly didn't need a wood carver, but we worked it out. And so on weekends, we would teach. And we just tried it out. She would teach wood carving, and I taught woody woodworking stuff, and we both kind of liked that. And she kept talking about, well, I'd like to start a school for kids, and we'd teach this sort of stuff. And so we just started doing that. I started doing little classes of spoon carving and whatnot, and we sort of formed a loose organization that was, I mean, I'm not sure we thought of it as a folk school yet, but we were actually marketing it. And then a pivotal moment was when two folks were invited up here to be part of a conference on climate change, and one of them was John Sasada, an old friend from Fairbanks. And we were on the river gathering bark and roots to take to a class. And he was offered this class through none other than summer sessions. So we were sitting on the bank of the river, and he said, this is the problem. We are taking these materials to a plastic laminate table and having them make things out of this. The real important piece of the puzzle is the woods and gathering materials and an understanding of how that all works and where they come from. And so for the next week, these two guys are staying at our house. We talked about this, and we thought, well, the only way to do that was to spend a week in the woods with people. So then that was the birth of Week in the Woods, the program that is now 18 or 19 years old. And the next year, we had our first go at Week in the Woods. And
tell me about it.
Well, we hadn't figured this out at all. It was still very much in a dreamy stage. And another friend who was a homeschool parent and very active in the community, Rebecca Levy, she calls me one day and says, well, I don't remember, Tony, she might have said 20 people signed up. How many can you take? And we didn't have a program. We didn't have a site. We hadn't thought about how to do this. So we did it, and it was really fun, and it never ended. And that then, after we were 2 years into that, and Susan Kernk was involved, and she said, you really need to get insurance. And I thought, oh boy. And then but we don't have an entity, so then we had to form an entity, and then we formed a nonprofit, and we called it Week in the Woods. And then just a year later, we decided that, no, this wants to be a year-round thing. And so then we changed the name to the Folk School, and Week in the Woods became a program of the Folk School, and all these other classes that we were doing were part of that. And that was sort of the genesis of all of that.
Yeah, I've seen videos of them, and they're lively and multi-generational.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. So has the site remained the same, or have you moved the camp around over time?
For a Week in the Woods, we have to move. This year we had to move. We got evicted for the fire. We were there, we set up camp, which is a 2.5-day job. And the participants were on their way out, and the fire boss says, "You're out of here." So we pulled up stakes, and we have a board member now that's very involved in Boy Scouts, and she pulled some strings, and we got into Lost Lake. So we turned the whole operation around and went up and set up a new camp at Lost Lake. But no, we have to move frequently because you beat up the woods.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy for anybody, especially the woods. So
Yeah. So let's follow up now with the Folk School a little bit, because it's extraordinary the range of classes and instruction you offer. How did it grow over time, John? Well, I only because I did a little radio segment with him for years. Walt Benish taught a class, and
you did.
I'm thinking brain power here. I'm not necessarily thinking hands-on, education.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, folk schools around the world offer a complete spectrum of learning experiences. It isn't just making candles or something. And our folk school did whatever we wanted to do, and we had really Frank Soos taught, Walt taught, we had creative writing for kids, we had poetry, so it was a little bit of everything, and that seemed to be a pretty good fit. Not sure we had a really good mission statement at the time, and we're working on that right now, trying to figure out what, as our new director says, our North Star is. But I think it's all inclusive. It's really, in my mind, it's any sort of lifelong learning for all generations.
Yeah. And talking about moving around, of course, you've moved the site a couple of times, and right now it's at Pioneer Park, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege of kind of talking with you down at the site, not only where the sort of main base is, but then the shop down the hill from there. So why move there? Why go to Pioneer Park?
Well, for a while, the folk school was our house, our kitchen counter. And then we had the opportunity to move to a place on Miller Hill, the Larson homestead. And we were there for a while, but we outgrew that a little too fast, and we actually had to leave. And then one of the parents that was bringing a lot of people to us suggested we move into her place because they were going to vacate it up on Beverly Lane, which is on the brow of the ridge between Murphy Dome and Goldstream Road, which is a horrible place to get to and a bad road. And we were there for a while, and the problem was that much of our programming required, for instance, parents to bring kids out after school. And those locations were just terrible for that. And so we started looking for something that was physically accessible to just about anybody, and we were desperate. And we tried all sorts of angles, and finally the borough said, well, you should consider, and we looked at the two offerings at Alaska Land, and they just looked so horrible. I mean, the cabin that you were in was so disgusting. It was moldy smelling and junk everywhere, and I mean, we were demoralized and we left, and it took us about a week to realize that we're just out of options. We're going to make this work one way or another.
Yeah.
And we did, and we mucked everything out. And the workshop is the old Native Museum at Alaska Land that we took over.
Well, and it's a huge space, I mean, I imagine, for hands-on or keeping materials there, right?
No.
Nope.
No. I mean, twice that size would be optimal, I think, yeah. Yeah, we desperately need more room, yeah.
Okay. Well, I just remember thinking, wow, that's a big,
Yeah, but put a dozen people in there.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that component of it because you talk about parents bringing kids there, but also that central location made it accessible to people who might not ordinarily think about a venture like that, either for themselves or for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Reaching out to a new constituency, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Has that proved to be the case?
Yes, I think we have made some inroads in attracting groups that we've never seen before. We worked a lot with, I'm forgetting the name of the place. With disabled people, and we had some really successful programs with them. We're seeing a lot more military people now, which is really exciting. Our kids programming is on again, off again. We've sort of lost grip on that, but we're hoping to revitalize that. But, yeah.
You know, a guy we both know and are friends with, John Holmgren, and I were talking one time, and he was just bemoaning the fact that shop class is no longer a thing in many schools. And what do you think about that? And what is the value of learning these practical hands-on abilities?
Well, I think it really doesn't matter what it is you're doing with your hands. It's just, if you're doing something with your hands, it's empowering, it's satisfying on a million levels. And the things that you learn in one of our classes, the hope is that some little tidbit of that will become useful in some other way. And we do a lot of really practical stuff, like how to maintain your Toyo stove. And so there's some direct stuff there, but what do you gain from making a birch bark basket? Well, if the course is sort of holistic and you go into the woods and you harvest bark and you talk about the trees and the forest and how that impacts the whole thing, and you dig root and you talk about that, and then you make a basket. Well, now that lesson is pretty comprehensive, and that information and that just the tactile experience of being that close to the woods and the materials has to have a positive effect on one's life.
Yeah, and I think passing on knowledge to a new generation. At the beginning for the legacy lecture, I talked with Tim Doran, and he was talking about the totem pole that is in the playground of his school, but it was the kids overseen by the master carver and artist, but he made sure those kids not only carved it and made it, but they knew the stories behind the figures of that pole. And I sense some similar kind of project or goal or vision for the folk school, and when you're talking like this, John. Would that be right? Is there a sense where having this sort of multi-generational exchange of information and seeing the natural landscape from which the materials are drawn has value beyond just making something.
Oh yeah, I think it's almost the reverse. The connection to our landscape and all of us that live there, bugs and us together, that's the most important part. And then the making things is just an exciting way to keep you engaged in that. And you know, if you focus on making things from what's in your own backyard, then you're going to become really familiar with your own backyard. And you know, we talk a lot about that closeness to your environment then yields a sense of stewardship, which I think we dearly need.
I want to talk about that community component for a minute, if you would, because by drawing various strands of our community together in a project like that, there are bridges formed with others from different backgrounds, different perspectives perhaps. But if you're together, learning something together, making something together, the chance is you'll have a better bridge of communicating with that person than you might otherwise have.
I think that's absolutely true.
Right.
Yeah.
And it seems like in our culture today that is a rarity. And we're going to talk about AI and the digital revolution in a minute. But I think that's an important function that we often overlook, is that ventures like the Folk School and your efforts are making our community a little tighter. That weave is a little stronger than it might otherwise be.
I hope so, yeah. I think we all wish for that.
Yeah. Well, I forget who I was talking to the other day who had skills similar to yours, and I asked him, are you feeling like you're out of your time? I mean, do you get our age at all? Because everything is so on the screen, and people are checking phones constantly. And that sense, it's both deceptive because you think you're communicating with people, but you're not physically present with anybody. And so would you talk a little bit about your experience of sharing knowledge and not being on a phone all the time?
Well, I'm not on the phone much at all, and I don't even have
Why
one.
am I not surprised?
But yeah, I mean, so at Week in the Woods, we don't allow devices. And for many people, that's really pivotal, and they speak to that after. We have a circle at the end of the program when everybody has a chance to sort of talk about their experience, and one of the things that comes up is, at first it was difficult, but it was really the best time ever. I mean, that separation is so important. And the other piece of that I find both frustrating and rewarding is that if you don't Google everything and you just keep the questions in your mind, you don't need an answer. But the curiosity to keep asking the question and keep... So,
you know, did you plan that, John? Because that was pretty amazing.
I pay big bucks for these shills.
Yeah, I know.
You know, this is...
In show business, we call it a shill.
Exactly.
In the audience. Yeah, but go ahead, I'm sorry. About not having phones and devices all the time you were talking about.
Yeah, and just the fact that you're okay without having a formulated answer. That's a wonderful place to be. You don't need the answer. You don't need the name of that moss or that plant, as long as you sort of recognize where it lives and what it's doing and who its neighbor is. And when you have a device, the first thing you want to do is, I want to know what that plant is. That's a distraction, because if you really think about the plant in context, that it's in this shady spot and it's next to these other guys, that's the more important piece of the puzzle. And just holding those questions in your mind and not knowing is okay. Ignorance is not a bad thing sometimes.
I'm going to tell Julie that when I get
Oh,
home.
good.
I'll see how far I get with that one. Well, all right, and let's talk about the outdoors a little bit, because all the time we're talking about building cabinets or teaching in the folk school, your passion for being outdoors continues, and you're continually out there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience, how that keeps going, and what you look forward to and what it gives to you? In 15 words or less. I mean, time's coming.
Yeah, it's a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's rejuvenative. I am energized by being outdoors and in the woods. And it doesn't have to be the woods. I mean, I enjoy putzing around in our yard. But just being outdoors and interfacing with critters of any kind, plants and bugs and things. And I just find it endlessly intriguing. And I like to share that with other people and try and draw them into that same sense. And more I'm doing that as part of my classes that I do. I try to have at least part of it somewhere in the woods, so that at least we have that part. Yeah, it's energizing, it's creative, it's fun.
I remember Terry Chapin talking about he wrote a book just about raising concerns about global climate change. And he said, one of the most important steps you make is just getting out into the world at large.
Yeah.
And so much of us are at screens or on phones or on our tablets that it's just out your door and you can go out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you have any kind of hopes or visions where the folk school is, where you would like next adventure, next object you're going to make? I didn't ask you about the birch canoes and those projects. It would be fun to hear about those.
Well, we have here our instructor for the birch canoe, Randy Brown, and he may be the state's expert on this. And we've done, I think, 4. Is that correct, Randy? Canoes?
3 for the folk school.
3. And so, and I had never done that before. I took Randy's first class and just was over the top. I mean, that was such an amazing experience. And just the techniques and the usefulness of these materials from the woods is incredible. Mm-hmm. You know, the thought that you have a perfectly water-worthy, durable craft and everything came from your backyard. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and of course the skill to make that. But you know, it's kind of interesting. A friend of mine who's passionate about trees was observing some of the strange behavior some of the aspen are exhibiting lately. And of course we hear about birch barks, beetles and whatnot. And when you are out in the natural world, do you see these changes? Do you see things that give you sort of like pause at all, John?
Well, you certainly see a lot of the disease things going on, particularly with aspen, and then of course a little bit with bark beetle on spruce. But the thing that is completely baffling to me is that the normal time frame and accessibility of birch bark harvest is fluctuating, and I can't. It used to be when the roses bloomed, you could get birch bark off the tree, and you know, that's what we always did. And now it's coming off earlier, and then it's not coming off earlier. Sometimes when the roses are blooming, you can't get it off, or certain trees you can't get it off. And so there's something magical going on that is changing that. We've been able to get birch bark off easily in the fall a few times, and I don't think that's normal. Have no idea what's going on, but at least in my experience, that's different than it used to be when I first was introduced to this idea.
Before we open it up to questions, what's ahead? Do you have any adventures, any projects that you're looking forward to?
Whew. Not specifically. I am more involved in the folk school now. Again, I'm no longer on the board. I wasn't for a long time, and I had sort of restricted myself to mostly teaching, but we have made a step in that we actually have an executive director now, and she has brought new energy to the overall thing, and so I'm putting more time into that because I can see we're moving in good ways, and yeah, I just see hopeful things. I don't know what they are specifically, but I think it's going in a good direction.
Well, it's no small thing to nurture a
Oh, my
nonprofit, is it?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, about this time, I have to tell you, several people who have been part of this series and will be part of this series will say, oh, you're talking to John Manthei. Well, I remember X, Y, and Z. So usually I open it up about this time for questions from the audience. So I'm going to. So you may have some hardball questions or some sliders coming through.
So I am open to that for sure, but the one thing I wanted to say is that this craft piece that I now am labeled as, I mean, birch bark and doing these things, that's new to me. That I didn't know that as long as I knew other projects, woody woodworking stuff. And all of that knowledge came from young people. And so I find that a really wonderful thing that my teachers were people half my age in that field of things. And it continues. They are just more knowledgeable about a lot of this stuff. And I just think that's a wonderful place to be in, to have had that experience.
And what a gift.
What a gift, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any recollections or reflections or insights? Randy.
Somewhere in your biography it mentioned spending time on the water. I don't think you talked about that. I assume you took canoe trips and raft trips. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, but I built a big, beautiful boat.
No?
And and
Well, tell us about your time on the water, places you've gone and explored.
oh, well, the current boat, which is kind of big, it lives on the water on the Chena because it's too big to get out of the water, except once a year. And so we leave from the Chena, which somewhat restricts how far we go, but we've been down as far as Galena and up around the bridge and stuff, but mostly the Tanana, mostly local, out and about on the Tanana, and we can carry a canoe on top and paddle around on little creeks and stuff, so just, yeah. And that's a good place to find root and bark and stuff. And bourbon.
You're harvesting as you go along.
Oh, yes.
Do you walk the Kantishna?
I have. The Kantishna is, I don't know if any of you have done the Kantishna, but it is this, and then you stop and you say, oh, I saw that spruce tree 2 hours ago. And I mean, it is like a really slow trip. I've been up as far as the Bear Paw. We have. Tony and I have, yeah.
And to Dawson.
Yeah, we went to Dawson, yeah.
Well, that sounds like an epic.
That was in the first boat. The first boat was open boat, and we got into some...
Let me just make sure that those boats survived and you just decided to build more, because you say the first boat and it's like the Titanic,
Wasn't
right?
terminal.
It was,
No, the first boat was a wonderful boat, and it's an open boat, and Michael Wald from bought that boat when I built the new boat. But it was the old boat that we were on this trip to Dawson, and we got into some snotty August weather, and it was cold and windy and rainy for day after day after day. And we kept thinking, how could we put a tent on? How could we structure something to get out of the weather? Because we were soaked, everything was soaked. And so that was the birth of
the second.
what is kind of the floating Winnebago. You know? Little more elegant.
Yeah, well, yeah, I want to say, who sells those plans to build that? Did you kind of, well, I mean, that's interesting. You must see plans and adapt them as you're building, right? Or how does that work for you, John, when you tackle a bigger,
Do we have...
yeah, all right.
So, well, no, I mean, the original idea is an old style poling boat, and they're common all over the world. And they're widest 1/3 back, and then they taper narrower and narrower toward the back. And Oliver Cameron, of some infamy from the Ambler, was the one that showed me that and encouraged me to build one, and that was our first boat. And then when I expanded it to the Winnebago, I just stretched that out and put a house on top.
Oh, when you say it like that, easy.
I just wondered, does it sweep narrower at the back, the new boat?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Its widest point is 1/3 back from the front, and then narrower and narrower.
Nikki, I saw your hand back.
Well, I'm just struck once again by the confluence of history that happens at these tall timbers. And, you know, you were talking about building cabinetry, and when I first met you, you were building the cabinets at the Goldstream store, and the Bishops were my customers, and Sarah Tabbert was my customer, and you know, the Mayos, and the influence that was on your life, and I'm looking at John Wright, and I'm, you know, so just a sort of an overall mushy-gushy comment. And you fixed my spinning wheel.
I know, but
Spinning wheel that I brought.
Okay, just
To
I want to
the-
summarize for people who might not have been able to hear Nikki.
Oh.
Is just your experience here in the thing. There's this confluence of wonderful people who come together and sort of make magic.
yes, yeah. And I mean, everybody here in one way or another is a part of that fabric. And Nikki was the first one to vet me as a woodworker, because she dearly loved her spinning wheel that was broken. And she didn't really trust me at first. And she wanted to know that I wasn't going to booger it up for her.
Dick?
John, you mentioned poling boats, and maybe you could explain why it has the name and why it has the shape in relation to how it's used.
So what is
A lot
a
of us-
polling
I
boat?
don't think,
Why is it called?
those are boats used properly and extensively quite a while back. And I don't think a lot of us know much about it.
Including me. Randy probably does. I mean, so I know that they were used as polling boats because of the stories I heard and the pictures that you see in the archives, but they were also used by these early motors that were like 2-horse Elgins, you know, And you see this picture of Samson's, and on the beach in front of Samson's are these 30 and 40-foot boats with this tiny little motor on there and piled full of boilers and dogs and sacks of rice and cans of gas and everything, and they would go everywhere with this little motor. And poling, I guess, I mean, I don't really know how it works. I've tried it and I'm terrible at it, but you basically push the boat forward with 1 or 2 poles. And I've never done that, so I can't tell you.
But the shape
The shape,
accommodates polling, right?
exactly, so it's narrow, and I think that, number one, a narrow thing going through the water with a little fatter spot on the front, there's something about hydrodynamics that works easier. It takes less effort to push that forward. And so a smaller motor or less effort poling or less resistance in current, maybe those sorts of things. But I am not knowledgeable in that, other than,
You're not gonna start a class on it?
no, no.
The floating Winnebago.
Oh, it has a nice ring. to
There
it.
you go. It's all in marketing, John.
It is.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. When you were young, you talked about being with your family and whatnot. Did you have a shop then? Did your father have a shop?
We had a basement, and there was a bench in the basement. I mean, a real lumber heavy bench, and it had a face vise on it and a little iron vise on it, and I used it all the time. And there were always tools around. My dad wasn't a woodworker, but for whatever reason, there was a full complement of tools around, and I wrecked every one of them. Yeah. And my dad worked down there. He had a drawing board down in the basement, and he did sign painting on the side in addition to his regular job. So, yeah.
Well, I'm sure lots of people will be talking to you, but I want to thank you, John Manthei, for sharing tonight.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you.